Hello everybody, and welcome to Guild Wars 2 Daily. First of all, yeah, yesterday, you've probably seen that editing mistake I made in there. Yeah, I repeated that line a few times. That happens quite often when I'm filming these. Usually I cut it out, but I have no idea how. But yeah, so I missed that. Very embarrassing. But there you go, guys. The footage in the background for today is random event stuff. Hopefully it will be somewhat related to the topic at hand for today too. And you can join in for future footage if you wish to by following me on Twitter, where I'll be announcing after recording commentary each day where we're going and what we're doing. Yesterday, by the way, World vs. World, super fun. The footage was a bit lame, really. I cut out a big bit where I died, actually. I was trying to fight this thing and I died, and then I cut it out. And I was a little bit worried about this. There were so many of us that ended up coming. We just kind of immediately got railroaded into, oh, yay, now we're at a freaking keep or a gate. And I don't actually really like that much about World vs. World. I much prefer going around in small groups, harassing Doliacs and supplies, going around in smaller fights that are more interesting to actually participate in, so it's not massive zergs, and you actually get to feel like you have a bigger involvement in each and every fight. And the other thing I really like to do in World vs. World, as I found out yesterday, because we ended up playing for ages, is claiming a location and just building up the defenses of it. We ended up getting destroyed after spending a few hours building up the defenses of one place because just tons of people from the other server came in and dominated us. But still, it was a lot of fun. We actually went in there with Emery Bay not owning much on our borderlands, and by the end, at our peak, we'd recaptured absolutely everything on the entire map, which was awesome. So that was really cool, and I'm looking forward to next week when we do some more World vs. World. As I say, everyone's welcome to come. I will be now saving up for Commander because I think that will be useful for these situations, certainly. So I think I'm going to start saving up for that, since, as I said yesterday, I don't think I'm going to go for a legendary for a while, so that eases up what I'm going to be spending my money on. So it will take me a while, but that's kind of what my next goal is in any case. For today, since there's been no official news again, none whatsoever, which is a bit of a shame. I'm wondering how often we're really going to get stuff like that, but there's been none. There has been a patch, which we'll talk about on Monday, but no official news. And also, since we did questions and answers yesterday, I thought I'd just do a lore spotlight for today, and in particular one that might be slightly different because it's going to be a bit of a story time spotlight too. There's not been that much new information about this story that's come out since the launch of Guild Wars 2, but I do feel like it's quite significant, particularly with regards to what ArenaNet might be doing in the future for future updates. And I'm happy to see that in Guild Wars 2 they didn't do any kind of cop-out with this particular story, because this is something that I've been super fascinated with from Guild Wars 1, and I really wanted to see either a decent conclusion in Guild Wars 2 or them to put off the end of the story to give it more justice or whatever later on down the line, and that's what they seem to have done. I'm talking about Saul D'Alessio and the White Mantle. This is something a fair few of you are probably familiar with at this time, but you might not know what they did with this story come Guild Wars 2, which should be very interesting. You might have heard the name of this character too, but you might not know exactly what's going on, so I thought I'd give everyone another crash course on exactly what's going on here and what they did with this character come Guild Wars 2. So, first of all, Saul D'Alessio was the leader of a group called the White Mantle. These people were in charge of Kryta, and for at least for a short time, in my opinion, were a force for good in Kryta too. They're who saved Kryta from an invasion from the Char during Guild Wars 1's time, and they had stood up when the true king of Kryta, a man named King Jadon, had fled the throne in the wake of the Char attack. This man, Saul D'Alessio, formed this group of people called the White Mantle to defend the nation, and they indeed did save it from the Char. Now, the way they did this is reasonably questionable, though, because Saul encouraged his people, the White Mantle, to come into the worship of some new gods, rather than the five, as it was at that time, the five true gods that humans had always known before then and were now backing out and had less of a role to play in Tyria. He encouraged everybody to worship the Masat. This is one of the ancient races that existed on Tyria a long time ago that participated in the previous downfall of the Elder Dragons. They're a very old race. But the Masat didn't necessarily have entirely noble intentions, and Saul, for better or worse, had encouraged much of Kryta to worship these things. The Masat did help the Titans protect themselves from the Char, but after that, the White Mantle began to, shall we say, rule with more of an iron fist. And that's because Saul D'Alessio himself, after he'd saved the nation, kind of went missing. He's got a really fascinating story. In fact, I'm going to read out here two stories about Saul D'Alessio that we had from Guild Wars 1, not necessarily in-game, but around the game, that kind of tell the story of the founding of the White Mantle and Saul. And once we're done with that, we'll know kind of where the story was at the end of Guild Wars 1, and then I'll tell you what we've seen in Guild Wars 2 and what the writers seem to have done with it, which is really cool, really fascinating. So, There is a third story called The Protectors of Kryta, which was a very old story that we got about the launch of Guild Wars 1 that comes in 2 parts, and there's one of those parts comes into this a little bit, but really it's not that great for it. But if you want, there'll be a link in the description to this other story. If this catches your imagination, you want to read a little bit more about it, you can have a look there. But I'm going to be reading you mainly one story from the manuscripts of Guild Wars 1. So this is the big lore book you got with Guild Wars 1. There's also a copy of it up on the Guild Wars 1 wiki, which again I'll link to too. And also I'm going to read you another story that we got from something called the bonus mission pack in Guild Wars 1. But okay, so without further ado, we'll just go with the manuscripts first. This is Saul D'Alessio, a bit of a description of who this person is. Saul D'Alessio was a fallen man. A gambler and a drunk, Saul reached the lowest point in his life when he lost a bet he could not repay. At the time, the local betting house was run by the Lucky Horseshoe, a gambling guild whose influence spanned almost the entire length of the continent. To avoid defaulting on his payment, Saul took to robbing merchants, travelling on the road from Beetleton to Shaymore. Though he successfully paid his debt to the Lucky Horseshoe, he was eventually fingered by one of his victims and tried as a thief. His punishment was exile from the kingdom of Kryta. The local authorities blindfolded him and rode him out 3 full weeks before leaving him to fend for himself. Alone, broke and lost, Saul wandered through a dense forest for several days, surviving on only roots and berries. On the 4th day, delirious with hunger, Saul emerged from the trees to see what he thought was a hallucination. A city of massive towers reaching into the heavens. The architecture was astounding, and the creatures who lived here were unlike any he'd ever seen. Walking down into their city, Saul got a closer look at the denizens of this place. They were tall and thin, with strange wing-like appendages that waved about in the slightest breeze. When they walked, their feet seemed not to touch the ground, and when they spoke, it was the most melodious sound he'd ever heard. Surely these creatures were the stuff of divinity. Hungry and exhausted, his clothes ragged and dirty, Saul dropped to his knees and touched his forehead to the ground. He had found his gods, and they in turn had found their most devoted disciple. Saul returned to Kryta a changed man. His rags had been replaced with a sleeveless, pure white robe embroidered with golden thread. His once sunken, sickly features were again full and healthy. He no longer craved the bottle, no longer wished to strike it rich with gambling. His life had purpose. He had returned to spread the word, to deliver his finding to the humans of Kryta. During this time, the Krytan Empire was in the midst of 2 wars, one against the guilds of the other human nations, and another against the beast-like Char. Food was becoming scarce as the invaders burned the crops and salted the fields. It was then that Saul came to the people, offering help from his powerful, enigmatic gods. Saul's new faith was so powerful that soon he had a small following. As a group, they travelled the land, recruiting more and more, offering salvation from trying times. Though no one ever saw the winged gods or their cities of massive towers, they took Saul at his word that they did truly exist. Saul was a shepherd, and his sheep followed his every step. Those who showed real conviction were given white robes, each embroidered with golden thread. This was the beginning of the White Mantle. Beaten, outnumbered, leaderless, and facing almost certain death, the people of Kryta looked to Saul to lead them out of their darkest hour. Saul D'Alessio was transformed from a messenger into the general of a great army. With their new faith and their new leader, Kryta and the White Mantle managed to push out the Char, forcing them back over the mountains. Though his efforts were successful, Saul eventually lost his life fighting the war that freed the humans of Kryta. In the last offensive of the war, against the Char, Saul led his troops deep into Char territory. His network of spies, though normally quite effective, failed him on this day. The Char were waiting in ambush, and the beastly creatures slaughtered Saul's unit to the man. Consequently, Saul became a martyr for the White Mantle. His teachings live on in the temples, and his name adorns a seacoast on the southern edge of Kryta, a memorial to a man who brought peace and prosperity to the people of this tropical region. So that's the first story, that's what you get out of the Guild Wars manuscripts. It's actually incorrect in various areas. It says here that Saul died. Well, it was revealed to us late on in Guild Wars 1's development when ArenaNet released something called the bonus mission pack, that in fact he wasn't killed during this assault. Turns out the Masat, these gods that he found for his people, turned out to be real despite anyone's doubts, and they weren't necessarily in it for the Krytans. They didn't necessarily like the Krytans. They in fact began to sacrifice Krytans to their own ends, and really came out to be reasonably evil as a race. Now, it is disputable whether the Masat were evil or whether they were not, but they're certainly painted as that picture. They were the original foe, really, of Guild Wars 1. And it was these guys, the Massart, that had actually been responsible for the disappearance of Saul D'Alessio. The White Mantle, after they defeated the Char, returned to spread the rumours that Saul had been killed by the Char because they didn't want the general public to know the truth of what had happened. This was the story you got to see while playing as Saul himself in the bonus mission pack. And through the bonus mission pack, you actually begin to write, as it were, your own journal of what happened. You write your own story. And that's what I'm going to read to you now. It's specifically the story about that night when they went out to attack the Char and defeat the Char and save Kryta. Chapter 1 reads, A Fallen Man. His name is Saul. This is his tale. As Ascalon burned, the Char invaded the nation of Kryta. Their army marched through the far Shiver Peaks and fell upon Kryta like lions upon a kill. Already weakened and divided, the Krytans were easy prey. During Kryta's invasion, its potential saviour, Saul D'Alessio, stumbled through the jungle, waiting for death. A gambler, a cheat and a drunkard, Saul had been exiled to the wilderness for his many crimes, and he expected to die there. Instead of death, he found salvation at the hands of the Unseen Ones. The Unseen Ones were radiant beings, tall, thin and winged, both superior and kind to men. They healed Saul in body and soul, giving him wisdom and understanding. Saul returned to Kryta reborn, a messenger of hope. Abandoned by their leaders, betrayed by their countrymen, hungry and worn, the people of Kryta flocked to Saul's banner and rallied to his cause. Saul and his followers saved desperate and defenseless Krytans from the Char, but there were too many invaders, and Saul's disciples were too few. Hope remained, but it was hope that required an ultimate sacrifice. Saul and his most dedicated followers devised a desperate plan. They knew the location of the Char's main encampment. If they could find the Char leaders and cut them down, the resulting confusion would give other Krytans the chance to rally, or escape. Saul and his followers did not fool themselves. They were not heroes, and they knew they couldn't withstand the main Char invasion force. The best they could hope for was to trade their lives to give Kryta some precious time. Saul thought their sacrifice would be a worthy death, if in dying they could save Kryta. In the name of their faith, they could do no less. Under cover of night, Saul and his trusted followers stalked through the Char war camps. They were aware that the slightest miscalculation could awaken their foes, bringing the full fury of the Char down upon them. After reaching the Char main camp, they dispatched the Char leader and his lieutenants. Their success was short-lived, for their battle raised an alarm among other Char. Bloodthirsty Char sought revenge. Saul knew this would be the price of their bravery. For one last time, he knelt and led his followers in prayers to the Unseen Ones. This time, the Unseen Ones answered. They manifested among Saul's amazed followers, offering to protect him and his most devoted servants. The Unseen Ones would fight alongside Saul's people and help defeat the Char, but the aid of the gods would come at a price. Saul faithfully agreed. The Unseen Ones descended on the encampment, repelling wave after wave of invaders. The Char invasion failed that day, and the surviving Char fled back beyond the Shiver Peaks. The Unseen Ones had made a promise, and they demanded their due. Kryta was safe, and Saul's most devoted servants could continue to worship and serve their new gods. The rest of the witnesses would have to die, however, for they had seen the true power and glory of the Unseen Ones. As Saul watched his followers struck down, he realized his gods were neither good nor wise. The Unseen Ones had promised to protect him, but not in the way he had hoped. To keep him from telling others what he had seen, the Unseen Ones took Saul with him. As he faded from mortal view, Saul realized he had not saved his people. He had betrayed them to new, harsher masters. And he wept, knowing he, a traitor who had unwillingly deceived his own people, would forever be considered a hero of Kryta. And that's what happens in game. That's what you see in the cutscene at the end of this mission. The Massart actually let a few of these followers go of the White Mantle leave, and they flee and spread this lie that Saul was killed by the Char, while we see that Saul himself was actually dragged away by the Massart, and potentially could still exist and be around come Guild Wars 2. We hear in Guild Wars 2 really that the Massart have slipped into an alternate dimension, as it were, and the idea could even be that they've done this to hide from the Elder Dragons. They, at some point in the past, were in an alliance with many of the other ancient races to defeat the Elder Dragons, or at least send them back to sleep previously, but they, sometime in the years since then, betrayed the other races of Tyria, and are now in hiding, essentially. The idea that they have these two two names, the Masart and the Unseen Ones, isn't just something that was born from the White Mantle who've never seen the Masart, but rather we hear from some of these other ancient races that the Masart actually became known as the Unseen Ones when they developed this ability to slip into an alternate reality, as it were. And you see that in game. The Masart can conceal themselves from mortal eyes that haven't undergone the necessary rites to see them properly, and can slip in and out of existence. And that's what they do. They take Saul out of regular existence. So moving into Guild Wars 2, this was essentially the story we had, and I was really hoping that we'd see something really substantial continued off of Saul's story. He's a really fascinating character. There's more that isn't described in these stories here that particularly interests me, like how he gave the Temple of the Ages, a temple dedicated to the worship of the traditional human gods, safety from the White Mantle, despite the fact he was preaching about the Masart in life. And there are all these various things about Saul that make him a very interesting character to me, and I was hoping they wouldn't just throw him to the wayside for Guild Wars 2. So what did they do with him in Guild Wars 2? Well, you can see in the Harathi hinterlands, there's a tomb to the guy. And from this, you might think, oh, right, okay, well, then he did die and he was buried in this tomb, and then that's that. And potentially, I even thought that maybe ArenaNet were contradicting their own lore when I saw it. However, when you go into this tomb, you can interact with the sarcophagus there, and you actually find that it's empty, that there was never a body there. That despite having a tomb, Saul D'Alessio was never in it. It never really had any use. So that raises some interesting questions. I think the idea here is that the White Mantle left, they spread this lie that he'd been killed by the Char, and to help sustain this lie, this great hero of Kryta, they had to build a tomb for him for the normal people, so they lied about it. They created this fake place, this memorial to him, and tricked everyone into believing that he'd actually been buried there, when in fact he had always disappeared. And that was really exciting for me to see. There's some other interesting stuff in the tomb too that they did with Guild Wars 2, in that going back to this idea that Saul had for some reason allowed the worship of the traditional 5 gods while he was alive and preaching about the Masart. Well, in his tomb, you can also see that there's a statue to the leader of the traditional 5 gods, or 6 gods as it now is, Devona. In Guild Wars 1, Saul was actually a monk. When you got to play as him, he was a monk. And in Guild Wars 1, that monks would traditionally look and follow Devona themselves. And now we have this tomb that's got a statue to Devona in there, which is really curious and a bit of a mystery, because the White Mantle certainly never believed in the 5 true gods or the 6 true gods, and yet they've built this place that still has a statue to one of them built directly inside it. Why did they do that? Why did they allow that? Well then, if you tie that into Saul and how perhaps Saul himself kind of wanted the statue to be there, then perhaps that suggests he'd even asked the White Mantle himself, if I should die, please leave this statue here. It doesn't make any sense that they've left it there in any other way, and that's a curious mystery to me that I don't really have a good answer for. Now, another interesting thing about the tomb is it's now overrun by ghosts in there, but the one area that's pretty much safe is where this statue of Devona is. Now, there's an Easter egg in the tomb as well, and that's that you can kneel at the statue, as the game hints for you to do, and you can actually summon an avatar of Devona, just as you could in Guild Wars 1. You interact with this avatar, and she'll tell you a story about a guard who had been charged with protecting the tomb, and his angry spirit was still residing around there. And once you've interacted with this avatar, if you can remember the name of this character and run over to the sarcophagus and speak the name, you can summon it, and you get this extra event, this veteran boss for you to fight. It's a really fantastic little place. I'd really recommend you guys to check it out. It's something in Guild Wars 2 that you can just walk over to, not really have any idea what the tomb's for, have no idea that there's this great big story there, and even no idea that there's this extra event or cool secrecy and intrigue there. So I really like this. I wanted to do a spotlight. That's really all they've done for Saul D'Alessio. We know that the White Mantle was still about, and there are hints in the human personal story that they're actually responsible for some of the bandit activity. There's also this fantastic situation that the White Mantle have now been pushed out of Kryta into the Maguma jungle, which is funny to me because in Guild Wars 1, the guys that were rebelling against the White Mantle while they were in charge had to fight from the Maguma jungle, so there's been a bit of a role reversal there, which I really like. The White Mantle are certainly still about. What they still think of Saul, who knows, but that tomb that they built for him in his honour, this memorial, this fake tomb, actually has been completely run down now. One last thing to point out about it is it's in an area called the Ruins of Holy Demetra. Demetra was the town that, or village rather I should say, that Saul launched his attack out on the Char from. You actually get to go to Demetra in Guild Wars 1 during the bonus mission pack. That's where it all starts. And that's where they buried him, at Demetra, or Holy Demetra as they now call it. It's a really cool place. Hopefully the footage in the background will have been, I will have at least ran us over there a little bit so you could see a bit, but I would suggest you see it for yourself. What does this mean for the future? Well, I think think it means that eventually, once we've moved away from this Elder Dragon stuff, or maybe even at the same time as the Elder Dragon stuff, ArenaNet will return to this idea of Sword Alessio, and he'll get some serious exposure, and they'll really expand on this story. They obviously don't want to conclude it. I didn't want them to conclude it too quickly, and they didn't just say, oh, here's his tomb, they found his body, it just ended up in a forest at some point, and there you go, that's all complete now, that's the story of Sword Alessio. They've left it hanging, they've given us a little bit more, but said that there is still this story to do with him, and potentially he is still out there somewhere. So it's really cool. I think it's one of the more interesting things that they could be moving forward with in expansions for Guild Wars 2, and there are these great hints about it there at his tomb, and I just really wanted to talk about that. So that's our lore spotlight for today. Thank you very much for watching, guys. I know a bit of it was story, and I know some of you may have known already a little bit about the White Mantle. Hopefully you've learned a little bit though, and hopefully you've got slightly wider eyes, because there's a lot of this stuff in the game, not necessarily all over the place, but there are a lot of things like this that are references to really big and intriguing stories that could define what an expansion means for Guild Wars 2 sometime in the future, and you might have just walked over it without even knowing. I know someone who went there and didn't even realise you could go into the tomb, like just completed the heart there without even knowing there was a whole place you could go inside, and that's fine, but just so that you know now, there is something there. Thanks guys, I hope you have a great weekend. I'll be back on Monday for patch notes, questions and answers, all that good stuff, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.